Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Pittaway. I'm the Executive Director of the MFA in Creative Nonfiction program at the University of King's College. I'm the moderator for today's session, Nonfiction Book Publishing, Tales from the Trenches, sponsored by the Canadian Freelance Guild and presented by the University of King's College. I am delighted to have with me 5 recently and soon to be published first-time nonfiction authors to share their experiences with you. I'm going to jump straight in with introductions because we do want to get rolling. But first, and as we do those introductions, I am going to share the terrific book covers so you can be sure to recognize them when you go into your local bookshop. And we'll get going with introductions. First up, on April 14th, 1971, a handful of prisoners attacked the guards at Kingston Penitentiary and seized control. They held the guards hostage for 4 intense days, making headlines around the world and drawing international attention to the dehumanizing realities of incarceration. Until now, few have known the story, yet the tense drama chronicled in Murder on the Inside is more relevant today than ever, as Canada's correctional system remains mired in crisis almost 50 years later. Catherine Fogarty, the author of Murder on the Inside, is an award-winning producer, writer, and director. She's also the president of Big Coat Media, a Toronto-based television production company. Catherine has produced many popular reality series, including the critically acclaimed Love It or List It. In addition, she has recently launched a new podcast network called Story Hunter Podcasts. She holds an MFA from the University of King's College, and Murder on the Inside is her first nonfiction book. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
In Acadian Driftwood, Tyler LeBlanc takes readers on a quest to uncover his family's forgotten history, a journey into the horrors of the 18th century deportations that scattered his Acadian ancestors and almost destroyed their culture. Told through their eyes, it is a gritty, gripping account of a dark chapter in Canada's history and an uplifting tale of discovery of heritage, of family, and ultimately of identity. Trained in creative nonfiction, journalism, political science, and history, Tyler LeBlanc is an author, screenwriter, and storyteller. He was born and raised in a small English fishing village on Nova Scotia's South Shore, entirely unaware of his Acadian heritage until 5 years ago. Striving to bring the horrors of the expulsion of the Acadians to a new audience, in April 2020, Tyler released Acadian Driftwood, One Family and the Great Expulsion, published by Goose Lane Editions. It is his first book. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks.
Most people who don't understand banking are afraid and don't get the lingo. Easy Money tells you what you need to know about corporations, banks, other forms of financing, and a glossary of terms. It uses real examples. You'll see yourself in them. It's everything you need to move ahead and get the people and institutions you need on side with you. Easy Money will build the confidence you need to understand how to get where you want to go. Leslie Marion graduated from Dalhousie University in Halifax in 1979 with an MBA, and in 1989 became a CPA. She received an MFA in creative nonfiction from King's College in 2018, which planted the seed for this book. Easy Money grew out of Leslie's desire to bridge the gap between bankers and small business borrowers, building on the knowledge she gained in over 40 years of banking to help people get what they need in the lending process. Welcome, Leslie. The Scientist and the Psychic is a captivating one-of-a-kind memoir about a scientist's life with his internationally famous psychic mother and his revealing exploration of the paranormal realm. Dr. Christian Smith weaves together the story of his fractured relationship to his mother with research into her stunningly accurate psychic perceptions, visions of the afterlife, and her involvement in infamous criminal cases to answer the question, do psychic abilities exist? Christian Smith holds a doctorate in the molecular and cellular biology of cancer from the University of Toronto, has 26 years of experience as a research scientist, and in 2017 completed the MFA in creative nonfiction at King's. Since 2006, he's been the manager of research operations at the world-renowned Brain Tumor Research Institute in Toronto. The Scientist and the Psychic is his first book. Welcome, Christian.
Thanks.
And finally, Karen Stiller never expected to be a minister's wife, and the life she discovered was more challenging and beautiful than she could have anticipated. We all wrestle with questions about life and faith, and Karen has learned that answers aren't easier when you're the minister's wife. What does it mean to live faithfully in our complicated world? Karen shines a light on the realities of the spiritual life for each and every one of us. Warm and achingly honest, this is a memoir and essays on choosing to belong. Karen Stiller is a freelance writer and senior editor of Faith Today magazine. Her work has appeared in The Walrus, Reader's Digest, and many other publications. She hosts the Faith Today podcast and moderates the Religion and Society series at the University of Toronto, a debate series between leading atheists and theologians. She lives in Ottawa and has an MFA in creative nonfiction from King's in Halifax. Welcome, Karen. Welcome to you all. And welcome to all of our attendees as well. I'm going to stop screen sharing and shift to our view of our panelists today. I know our attendees are anxious to hear our panelists talk about their journeys to publication. So we'll get started with some questions from me, and then we will be opening up the floor to questions from attendees as well. If you do have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. You'll see that there's a chat area, and then there's also a Q&A area. Please use the Q&A area. It's a little bit easier for us to track those at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. I'm going to start by asking each of you to share a few thoughts about what you found most surprising about the publishing process, something you wish you'd known when you started. Catherine, I'm going to jump in and ask you first.
Well, I don't know if it was surprising, but I always remember, I think one of our first lectures in Halifax, being told, don't quit your day job. So I think that was interesting advice. And, going into it as a first-time author, I mean, it is definitely, a big commitment. And I don't think I realized that going into it. I remember Dean talking about his book, and it had taken him 10 years to research that book. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, there's no way I'm spending 10 years. But now, just as I'm about to be published, it'll be 5 years. So it's definitely a big commitment, and you really want to be passionate about what you're writing and researching, because that's what keeps you going.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Tyler, what about you?
I don't know if it surprised me so much as made me feel really nice, but my answer would be just the dedication of the editing, the editors I had throughout my editing process. They were more careful, more sensitive, and more precise and thoughtful than I ever could have hoped. And they definitely made my book much better, and something that I am more proud of than the manuscript that I originally passed in. I've heard a lot of that the editing process can be kind of grinding and difficult. And there were definitely moments that were, but overall the editing experience was one of the most satisfying parts of the entire process.
That's great. And you worked with a smaller publisher as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because I know a couple of attendees had emailed me some questions in advance asking about that difference between working with big and small publishers. So we've got folks who work with, big, small, self-published, and everything in between here. So I think that we'll get some great perspective there too. Great. Thank you, Tyler. Leslie, what about you?
I have to echo Catherine's words. The first lecture, "Don't quit your day job," is very true. There's no money in publishing unless you're a Stephen King, shall we say. And dedication is clearly there. Yeah. So I self-published, and I'll talk about that later.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say I was just touched by the variety of books that when you introduced us, Kim. It's just such a cool salute to the program. I think such a wide variety of projects, even just right here. I think, like everyone has said so far, probably just how much work is involved. I don't know if I was surprised, but I think I was forewarned. But it still is a lot of work. And at this stage, like my book came out in May, it's work that I'm choosing to do, I think, in terms of engaging, with the book and doing my part in marketing and publicizing it. So it also occurs to me that it's work I could choose not to do, but I want to do it. So it's really been interesting for me to learn how that all works and how you need a certain level of confidence and energy and commitment to just keep going through the highs and the lows, and that there are both highs and lows in this.
Great, thank you. Christian, your book comes out later this year, so you're still in that sort of anticipatory stage.
Honeymoon period.
Exactly. But tell us what you found surprising about this process.
Yeah, similar to Tyler and Karen, I think it's, and we were warned in the MFA that after the first draft, you would go through so many cycles, and it's never perfect. So I was lucky to have a really good editor, and I just looked back, and I guess I submitted my first draft to her in December of 2018. And I got my first real feedback from her on February of 2019. So you can see how long it's been. I was supposed to be published in May, but it got pushed to December, which is fine by me. And I would say the biggest surprising thing that I had in the editorial process was my response to creativity on demand. Because when I got the letter from the editor, there was critiques and suggestions and things like that. Some of them questions that I didn't have the answers to, like because it's way past the time. I couldn't find that information. So I was worried that I wouldn't be able to respond to these things and put the content in, but I sat down and it was like magic. Suddenly your brain starts to spark and you get these ideas when you start thinking just within 5 minutes or in the shower. Then you have sort of a resolution to whatever the editor wanted to change. So I think if people are worried about that process and the editing process, don't be, because take a shower, it'll come to you.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you. So let's move on to a few questions. And because we have a big panel, I'm not expecting everyone to answer every single question. So I may, pick and choose a little bit as well, because we do want to open up the floor to questions from attendees too. But I'm wondering, Tyler, maybe if you can talk a little bit about how your idea shifted as you worked on your project.
Yeah, mine shifted greatly. After the first year of the MFA, I had a few chapters that no one will ever see. And I had talked with an editor at, Goose Lane. And she told me maybe I should take the summer and think about the structure a little bit. And so I did exactly that. I was pretty lucky. I was going to be away for the summer working, and I had a lot of time alone, and I completely restructured the book in my mind. Came back for the second year of the MFA, and I actually worked all summer on it, which I didn't think I was going to, and completely restructured the book. And then once it was accepted for publication by Goose Lane, again, we worked quite hands-on. They liked where I was going with it, but they had some questions toward the end, and I really didn't know how I was going to end the book. And we talked about adding chapters and taking chapters away. And at one point, there was this B narrative that was being weaved through the entire book. We ended up scrapping that and burying that back into existing chapters. And the book really just kept changing all the way until the end. Even when we were down to copy edits, things were still changing. And it really worked really well for me, because I was also changing throughout the process. Like many of us, the book took years. The book took 5 years, and I knew a lot more in year 5 than I did in year 2. And so having to go back and inject new information, or I'd proven myself wrong with something I had put in chapter 2 later that I'd learned. So the having the ability to let the project kind of go where it needed to go while I evolved as a writer and as a researcher, and the idea evolved, it was helpful to let it be flexible. And I think when I started the project, I had this really concrete idea of what I needed the book to be for me. And in the end, it came out to be something very different. When I went back and read it after I finally got my first copy, I was like, wow, I put way too much information in this. But at the time, I was constantly questioning myself whether I was actually backing up everything I was saying enough. So even now, looking back at it, I still see it changing, even though now it's kind of solidified in print and I have to live with it, and I'm very happy with it. But it evolved a lot. I think I kind of went off from your question, but
no, that's great. That's great. Christian, what about your project? How did your project shift and change as you went through this process?
It shifted a lot. So originally I had a total different structure. It was going to be point of view one different, like scientist, psychic, that kind of thing. That was scrapped. It was too rigid. It was all from my point of view anyway, so I might as well just keep that as the common thread. So that kind of probably when I put in my proposal, it blocked HarperCollins they passed on it because they felt it was 2 stories. So screw them. But as I went on, I think the change, you get better as you're writing because you're getting that feedback from your editor. And I think it was just, it's a gradual thing of refining and refining and refining.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing that I noticed my editor said I did was I would put everything in that was negative. Like she said I went kind of overboard to disprove things. And she said, you don't need that. Let them make that decision for themselves and not over explain, I guess, the whole situation. So a lot of the things she pulled out, a lot of the examples she pulled out. So it was originally over 120,000 and now it's 90. So you could tell. Yeah.
Was that the scientist in you trying to make sure you had bulletproofed your argument?
I think so. I wanted to be, because she is my mother, I wanted to have that objectivity there. And so you kind of want to overcorrect a little bit.
Right. Great. Leslie, what about with you? How did your book change as you went through the process?
The book itself didn't, but I would say, Kim, that I learned to put more of myself in it. Mm-hmm. As I wrote more, I got feedback from the mentors. Mm-hmm. And if anything, it's you have to brag about yourself. You gotta put yourself in it. And I thought that by teaching, I had learned that, but not so much.
Yeah.
So that's how it changed for me.
Yeah. And I think, it's certainly a common theme that we hear in the program, but and I'm hearing it bubble up here is that sometimes that initial discomfort with weaving yourself into a story and finding the right balance of you in a story, yep. Even if it's not necessarily a memoir, but some other kind of book where you're making the choice about whether you're in these pages or not. Yep. Yep. And in some cases, you're not in those pages. Sometimes it's not the appropriate route, but there is that question along the way. Yep. I want to ask Catherine how important your book proposal was in this process, in getting the book published, and in the process of clarifying for yourself what this book was.
I think it was very important because until you have that document and you've really honed that document, you have to be very, very clear on what your book is, and you may have a story and you may have an idea, but it's so important to rework that and rework it and share it and talk to other people about it. And that's what the program was great for, because I'm sure we all went in, you've got great dreams and aspirations of what you want to write about, but until you really start putting that down on paper and answering those questions that a book proposal requires you to do, And you may even get to the point where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I am writing. I know what I'm writing about, but so it was very important. And then when it went to the potential publisher, I think because it, you know, a lot of work had been put into that, what the book was about was very clear, and that certainly helped pave the way to, you know, getting that publisher to come on board.
Now, Catherine, you didn't have an agent in the process, did you? You went direct to a publisher, correct?
I did. What I did, I think I was just thinking, it was not long after the program ended, the MFA. I was working with a editor, so I had asked some people through the program if they knew of, you know, an editor to work with. So I started working with an editor who, at the time, she was working sort of freelance. She'd worked with a number of publishers, and when I met her, she was working freelance. So we worked together for a couple months, and then she actually asked me, she said, you know, I work with this publisher, and would you mind if I sent him a few of your chapters? And so I said, yeah, sure, okay, thank you. And I didn't hear anything probably for 2 or 3 months, and I thought, okay, well, you know, this will be the first of you know, many rejections, and I was certainly prepared for that, as prepared as you can be. But I was very, very fortunate that first publisher finally did get back to me and said he wanted to publish the book.
Great.
So, and then that made it very real. I was like, oh, I've actually got to write this book now. I've got to finish this book. So, yeah, that's what happened for me.
Nothing like a signed contract to clear the path
Yes.
forward. Yeah.
Yes.
Karen, what about you? How did your book proposal impact your process from defining what the book was, but then also its importance in finding an agent, finding a publisher?
Yeah, well, at the very beginning, the book proposal for me was nothing more than a class assignment that I had to do. And I really enjoyed doing it within the way we did it. Our little mentor group all sort of contributed to the conversation that resulted in a book proposal. So it was actually a great opportunity to listen to other people responding to my very early ideas. Because I wasn't sure yet what I was writing. So yeah, super helpful exercise. And then as the book continued to grow in the program, I think I ignored it, to be honest. I'm pretty sure I just went ahead and did my own thing because I was discovering what I was doing as I was writing. But when it came time, when I had an agent, my agent had me redo it many times with her. Like, we kept batting it back and forth. She had her own ideas of what the book proposal should look and sound like for my book. And so it was a whole other layer of rewriting that happened with that. And we actually did that several times as we targeted different publishers. So it became another kind of partnership opportunity, actually. So I learned a lot from that too. So I probably should have asked my publisher. I could have, how important the book proposal was, because I'm actually not sure in the end. But anyway, that's my answer.
And so you did work with with an agent. How did that relationship happen, and how did you decide that was the right agent for you?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have been selective, I don't think. I was very, very happy to find an agent. And so I will say that I definitely went through a process of no's before I received a yes from an agent. So it wasn't easy. I was reflecting on this as I prepared for today, remembering I had a couple of agents, like I asked author friends of mine, you know, would you recommend an agent, or could you introduce me to your agent if you're comfortable? They very kindly said yes, but I had agents not call me back. You know, when we had arranged a phone meeting, I had that happened twice with one agent that I was really excited to speak with. I had other agents just never return an email. So it was like the thick skin required process started with trying to find an agent. And in the end, I found an agent through the program, in fact, because it was through the exercise of sitting down, as you have to do, in front of an agent and kind of fake pitching your book, where one of the agents, Hillary, said, you know what, send me your stuff, even though the actual one-on-one meeting I felt didn't go well. And she asked me great questions that I couldn't answer. And I was stumbling all over the place, but she was like, I'm interested enough to read a chapter. And I did that. And then I sent her the rest. And then we were in business together from there. So.
Perfect. And Christian, you also worked with an agent, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you connected with your agent and what that process was like?
Yeah, I was actually very lucky because I also met my agent through the program. This was in New York, believe it or not, but my agent was from Toronto. She had been, I guess, flown in to do the MFA, but also do some book hunting festival thing, or at the same time, I guess. But she sat down with me during one of those mock pitch sessions, and thankfully I got my first pitch session done, which was a disaster, and had that out of my system. And then when I met with Stephanie, things went much better. So definitely do your pitches multiple times before you sit down with someone you're very interested in working with. But she came out and asked after the session was over in the hallway and just asked if I had an agent. I said no, and she said, I'm from Toronto, do you want to have a coffee? And that's where it went. So she was with Transatlantic, and now she moved just recently to Cook McDermott, and I went with her.
Mm-hmm. Great. And in that relationship, what surprised you? What value did you gain from that relationship with her?
Well, the book proposal, for one. So we had a book proposal in the program that seemed to have everything in the kitchen sink in it, whereas Transatlantic had this sort of tried and true kind of formula that they do. So we pulled out a lot of stuff that was in the traditional book proposal, and I just followed their guidelines. So became a little bit more succinct, and obviously it hit all the major things like comps and sample chapters and chapter summary, all those things. But it was just a little bit, instead of this, it was, narrowed down to be more focused. So her feedback on that was obviously what helped get a bite with Penguin Random House and a few others. So
great, excellent. Leslie, you self-published. Can you talk a little bit about what decisions took you to self-publishing and what your experience has been with self-publishing?
Well, Kim, I wanted to get the book out quickly because I think it's always been a puzzle to me that people didn't know, unless they came from the banking system, what the banks were about. So I self-published, and I used somebody local so I could talk back and forth. And she had been in the publishing business for quite some time. So I just wanted to get it out quick, and I didn't have an agent. I met HarperCollins, I think, through the MFA, and they did tell me that my audience was so small that they couldn't market it. So I self-published.
Yeah, and you do seminars and workshops and other things with borrowers and small businesses anyway. So that sort of gave you a pathway to that audience that
it did.
Yeah.
And I had a small business person read it before I published it. So I got his thoughts.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have somebody that volunteered to have his case study reviewed.
Right.
So that was all good. And then COVID hit.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the COVID curve as well, because I think everyone has been grappling with that a little bit. Tyler, you talked about connecting with Goose Lane. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that connection with your publisher and what what made a smaller regional publisher the right publisher for you?
Yeah, what seems to be a theme with the panel, I found my publisher through the MFA. An editor who was working with Goose Lane was a panelist. We chatted briefly after class once, exchanged emails. She was the one who pointed me in the direction of reconsidering my structure. I went back, wrote for another year, thought I had a good book proposal, got it all ready, sent it to her, immediately got a bounce back. She no longer works at Goose Lane. I was like, oh no, that was my in. But then immediately after I got that email, I got an email from the person who was in her position currently. And he said, sorry, she no longer works here, but I'm interested in looking at it. I'll get back to you soon. And we went from there. So it was just, approaching a panelist after a class, which I know is a bit harder now, but still possible digitally. And that's how I got my in. And from day one, I thought the book needed to go with a regional publisher. It's a regional topic. I mean, I think it has larger resonance, but it is certainly a regional topic. And particularly given the Acadian presence in New Brunswick, it made sense to go with a publisher that was based in New Brunswick. They know more about the history. They've published Acadian stories before. They have a better idea of the market and how to market it. Goose Lane was kind of the natural fit for the book, and I got really lucky and got the publisher I wanted, and it worked out really, really well for me. I couldn't be happier with how it's went, and going with a smaller regional publisher has all the benefits that it almost seem cliche. You feel like you're one of a smaller batch of authors they have because you are. And you do have a more personal connection. I was lucky, the editor who acquired my book lives here in Halifax. And so throughout the process, him and I could just meet up for a coffee or a beer and chat things out instead of doing it over email. And that was really nice, just a personal touch. And he was, just a great ally through the early days when I was feeling kind of lost and being like, okay, now I have to write this book. Hadn't really thought it through entirely yet. So let's chat. And so that was really nice. And then, there's we'll talk later, but the struggles that COVID has presented to us all, they've been really good. Goose Lane's been really good through all that. And we've just basically on a day-by-day basis are just communicating and trying to figure out ways to continue to market the book and being with a smaller publisher. They're putting as much energy behind promotion of my book right now, even though they're into a whole new season than when I was released. They're still pushing my book like they were the day it came out, which it's like, that's amazing. I couldn't ask for more than that. The fact that they still care. It's less work for me to do, but it's also just nice to know that someone else is pushing for you. So yeah, lots of benefits for me going with a regional smaller publisher. I couldn't imagine it with a bigger publisher, not to say that it'd be worse, but title specific, this was the best suit for me.
That's great. Excellent. Karen, what about with you? I mean, you went with a publisher that is an American publisher that has a sort of specialty within your community and with your niche. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I've wondered, what it would be like to have been with a smaller publisher during sort of a challenging time. But I'm also, I guess I'm thinking that the people in the MFA now, hopefully, if their books come out with a publisher, it won't be during a time of COVID. So I don't want to, talk too much about how that's impacted because I don't know the difference. But yeah, my publisher is a large American Christian publisher. As I started to realize maybe I do have a book on my hands, sort of halfway during the MFA, I would have said that's the logical, ideal publisher for me because there's not really an equivalent in Canada. It felt like the audience, my logical audience, it definitely is in both countries, but an American Christian publisher would have the sort of ability to get the word out about the book in Canada as well within the community that might logically buy it. So that always made sense to me. I don't know. I would love to have an experience with a smaller publisher to see, to compare. Like I feel like they've taken really good care of me prior to the book coming out and after, but I feel like it's been textbook what Kim Pidaway said would happen, the 3 months around the book's release, they are paying lots of attention, and then not so much after, but they are still there for me to bounce ideas off of with, the publicist that had been assigned to my book is still my publicist, but, a very clear line has been drawn, like, okay, if you want to pitch that place, you do that. I can encourage you, but you, Karen, need to do that now. So, but I think that's just how it works. So I wish I had more to compare it to, but yeah.
Great, thank you. Catherine, you're working with Biblioasis, right?
Yeah.
So they're a smaller publisher, but certainly one that in, to use that phrase, punches above their weight. They've had lots of award winners and big national impact too. Can you talk a little bit about what the process has been like with them as a publisher?
It's been a very positive experience. There has been I don't think there's been really any delays in their process due to the COVID situation. I know they certainly had challenges going into COVID because they also have a bookstore in Windsor, so they had to sort of decide and develop a whole new way of being able to sell books. But I think they've done a very, very good job with that. So I'm working with the managing editor at Biblioasis, and we've just gone back and forth with whatever needs that are required at the time. So it's been a time frame of the book covers and final edits and things like that. So we are still on track for publishing early in 2021 because that is the 50th anniversary of the riot. So we had, and I had really wanted to try to hit that mark. And certainly I'm sure it will be challenging, as others on the panel have already experienced, but working with Biblioasis has been a very good experience. I certainly have no issues or complaints at all.
One question that I didn't flag to you that I was going to ask, but it occurs to me as I'm talking with Catherine, and I'd love to hear from the others on this as well, because we haven't talked a lot about the actual process of researching your books, and I'm wondering, as you were doing the research, Catherine, I know a couple of the things that you found along the way, but what sort of serendipity happened as you were working and researching your book? Or was there anything that sort of stands out as being, holy smokes, I never thought I'd find that, or that this would come up?
Well, things would happen, I think, sometimes when you least expected it. So one of the main characters in my book, one of the prisoners that was at Kingston at the time, I could not and have not in 5 years been able to find any trace of this man. And I actually established a Facebook group about the book and about the Kingston riot a couple years ago. And then I would say about 6 months ago, on that Facebook, I got this little notice saying, I knew this person. I was his landlady in, 1975. So this woman, she and I ended up connecting, and he had gone to live with her in London, Ontario after he got out of prison. And she told me that he had told her all about the riot and had told her these different stories. And she was a young woman at the time herself. And she said, I never really knew if what he was saying was true. And, he talked to her quite a bit and told her about his childhood and the sort of rough life he'd led, and then he disappeared. And she had always remembered him and always had wished and hoped that she could find him again, and never did. So it was really great when we talked, because I was able to tell her that the things that he had said were actually all true. And I know that really meant a lot to her. And it was very sweet to know that this woman, I mean, almost 50 years later, was still thinking about this young man and what he'd gone through. Because a lot of the people in the riot, a lot of the prisoners that were in the riot, I mean, they were kids, 17, 18, that are, most of them were petty criminals. I mean, of course, there was some really hardened criminals in there, but most of the people that are in my book and that were involved directly in the riot, they were just kids that, came up through the system and had really tragic histories. So that was a really nice chance to be able to, give this woman some information about that young man that she had met many, many years ago. So.
Interesting. Thank you. Leslie, you wrote a book that is based on your professional insight and experience, but was there anything for you that sort of surprised you in that research process as you were pulling the materials together?
What I understood as time went on, Kim, was how little people knew of the bank world. Anybody that's commented on the book has learned something from it. And to me, it was like second nature.
Right.
So I learned just how little people know about the banking system.
Yeah. Great.
Indeed.
Tyler, what about you? I'm sure that there were some research surprises along the way.
Yeah, I learned that I had 500,000 cousins that I had never met. I mean, there was a lot. In researching the book, I uncovered the genealogy of my dad's side of the family, which no one knew. I debunked some family myths, maybe made some family enemies. I gave myself an education in something that I think should be mandatory education, particularly here in the Maritimes. And an event of which I did not know how terrible and far-reaching the consequences were. And just getting into seeing some of the primary documents and reading, the experiences of some of the people that actually faced this, referencing them to other events in history that I had learned about prior to this book, and just seeing similarities and just seeing how big of an event this was for a large group of people, and within the context of a war that forever shaped the history of North America, and seeing that this relatively small group of people who I was learning that I had a connection to, really were caught up in this massive geopolitical struggle, and all of that was new to me. I mean, when I started writing this book, I knew very little about the expulsion. I just wanted to know more, and so writing this book was my education in it. So that was just the fundamental facts and realities of the expulsion were probably the most surprising part to me, because I didn't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Christian, what about you? There must have been some surprises along the way for you as well.
Actually, there was one that I can just, when you said it, the word serendipity is actually totally the case. And that's why I would advise people to put it out in the internet world, what you're working on, because people will find it. And that's what happened to me. I don't know, I can't remember how her name was, Linda, how she emailed me. And I don't remember how she found out about the book, but she said, oh, I had a reading with your mother, and it filled a gap that I needed to have. I had my mother's past and present predictions sort of nailed down because that was in the media, the 50 papers. But then reporters tend to cherry pick the good things, right? So you never know if you're getting a full capture of things. So she actually had her reading in 1993, had the audio cassette tapes from the reading, and she was able to tell me all of the futures. We spent the afternoon together listening to it, And I basically scored everything that she said, oh, that happened, that came true, this was different than what she said, whatever. But I didn't have a measure of her, like a statistical analysis, so to speak, of what her future predictions were and how to tell if those came true or not until Linda came along. And that was just happened to be an email to me. She was willing to sit down with me and go through the tape. It was over 3 hours long, the tape. So, I got a lot of stuff out of that. Good chapter.
That's great. And Karen, what about you? What surprised you as you found your way through this series of essays and reflections?
Yeah, I would just love to encourage people in the class now who are writing memoir, because I remember at the time actually feeling sort of intimidated by people who weren't writing memoir, and feeling like I don't know, I got over it, but just the power of our true stories to connect us to one another. I just keep learning that over and over again. And I hear it from people who read my book and take the time to write and tell me that they feel seen and heard in a way that they haven't before, that is deeply meaningful. And so I really have a deep love for memoir now that I didn't even before I started the MFA. I read a lot of memoir as I was writing mine. And it's just so powerful and such an important form. So yeah, that was a lovely lesson for me that I keep hearing and learning.
That's great. So I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to put them on hold because I do want to open up the gate to questions from our attendees. So I am going to bring Dean Job forward onto the panel, and Dean is going to share some of the questions and ask some of the questions that our attendees have. So Dean, welcome. And you're muted. And you're muted, Dean.
Yes, and I know that everyone is very grateful for that, but here I am. So I'm going to start with a question for the attendees. I haven't received any questions yet, so please, I sent out a chat note just to say that you might have been holding back. Please put your questions in Q&A. I'll pose them in the order they come in, and I'll check them in a second. I'm going to throw out a question just to keep the discussion going. And I wanted to maybe, and I'll just throw it open to whoever wants to maybe start, about platform building. You've all now reached that stage where you're actually either about to promote or are promoting a book. What have you found useful in terms of platform building, and who wants to start? Karen, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Platform is just an ongoing tough issue, and I found my publisher, despite my platform, like they verbalized that. They're like, we've had success with memoir before with people who have no platform like you. So it was very refreshing and honest. And so since then, I've been doing a lot of work on Instagram, probably trying to be connecting there with readers. I've been focusing on podcasts and also just my own writing aside from the book, but that, in my bio line, I can talk about the book. So platform is so horrible to figure out. And I haven't cracked that nut, so.
Is anyone else? We do have some questions coming in. But
I'll jump in on the platform. I mean,
Sure.
I was worried about the whole social media. I think I have like 100 followers, so it's, but I listened to a podcast today of all things by Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work, and he has an aversion to social media, and his slant is developing your newsletter. So that means getting your website up and getting a newsletter, because emails don't go away as much as your followers do. So start with that. And what my plan is, everybody I've ever known in the history of mankind is going to get an email in December and saying, this is a one-time email. You may not be interested, but if you know someone who's interested, please forward this to them. And that's all I'm going to do as far as my social media plans go. I'm not going to worry about Twitter and Instagram and all the rest, just because it just sucks the soul right out of me. So I'm going to follow Cal Newport version of things and just hope that he said you'll probably get maybe 2 to 20,000 people buying your book. You're not going to get the 200,000. It's going to be word of mouth. So focus on the content of the book, make it the best book possible, because it's the word of mouth that's going to get there. So that's what I'm hoping happens in December.
Okay,
I
thanks.
think he's right.
Did you, actually, Leslie, hold that thought. I might come back to platform, but I do have some questions.
Yep.
Doreen wants to know, and it's for you, Leslie. Like you, she doesn't want to wait 2 years to get published, and she's looking at self-publishing. So she'd like to hear a little bit more about the process you used to self-published, and just your feelings or your reaction, or you were pleased with the process.
Kim helped me a lot because the readability factor is very big in self-publishing. You don't have an editor that goes back and forth. So I Googled and somebody local, and I saw some of the books that she had printed, and I was happy with them. So I just, I reviewed it probably 4 times or 5 times. And I went to Kim and asked her, because what we learned in the MFA wasn't precisely what she was doing. So I got some help there, but pretty much it's my book. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The next question, Karen, is for you. Amy would like to know if you could name a few of the memoirs and memoir writers who were especially inspiring for you as you were writing your memoir.
Sure. Luckily, I have my bookcases off to the left. Anne Lamott is a writer that I really like. She writes spiritual memoir essays, and so I've always learned from her. From the program, I discovered They Left Us Everything. I think it's called Plum Johnson. That was a book we talked about a little bit. A book about a memoir about a woman basically cleaning out her deceased parents' home. But of course, it's about so much more than that. Let's see. There's another author I really like, Lauren Winner, who weaves memoir with more, nonfiction narrative or whatever. So both appear in her work. I can think more about that, and whoever Amy is can email me, find me, and I'll give you some other titles, but right off the top of my head. Yeah, but it's so easy to find good memoir, just going into a bookstore and asking for recommendation or see what's selling. And but it is a genre, like all of them, that you can read a lot, learn a lot by reading a lot.
Thanks, Karen. And yes, that's and certainly, people should feel free to follow up with the authors, or you can follow up with Kim or someone in the program and we can relay a message on. David has a question about research. He's wondering about the process and specifically about one issue. How do you convince people to talk to you when in the course of your research, you can't really necessarily say if what they tell you or the time they spend with you will ever actually end up in a published book? So I guess maybe David's concerned about when you're interviewing and you're really not sure, perhaps, if this person's input or material is going to end up in the book. How do you deal with that? Anybody face that problem?
I did a lot of interviews for my book, and the one thing that I would always preface any interview or discussion with was, it's obviously it's a long process, a long research process, and the final word is with the publisher and the editor. So I would always talk about that, because that is the truth. I mean, we can't make promises that we can't keep. So, and then a couple times, I mean, people gave me photographs, and you know, of course, everybody who's telling you their story, they think that story is very important, and sometimes it can be, but in the grand scheme of what you're writing and what comes out at the end of the book, you know, it might be very, very different. So so I just think, yeah, if anybody asks you for anything, you certainly can't make any promises to what's going to end up in that final manuscript.
Anyone else face that dilemma? Okay, I'll move on to another one. Faye has a question. How much stuff did people have on paper when they started the MFA? Kim and I will actually audit this and make sure you are accurate. But I guess Faye's just wondering at you know, what stage were you at? Karen, you had a thought.
Yeah, well, I want to encourage people by saying I had written nothing in this project prior to the MFA. I
That's
started
me.
it in the MFA.
Me too, nothing.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, I also had nothing, and then everything I wrote in the first year I ended up scrapping. So I started the second year also with nothing.
Okay, well, it sends a message. We don't. Well, no, the idea of the program, of course, is that you know, you produce, you work on your manuscript. We do get people who do come with material. Some of them have a fairly extensive material, but they'll spend the 2 years honing it, reworking it, rethinking it, and of course, it's not uncommon that even the work you did in your first year, you'll start. Some of the authors here have alluded to that it changes over time. What as Catherine and some others have said, what you really need is an idea that you're passionate about, an idea that you want to spend the next couple of years with, but also that fires you up to do the work you'll need to do. Okay, another question. It's from Robin. For those panelists who are working directly with the publishers, what's the most important thing to keep in mind as an author? Anybody want to?
I can maybe take a crack at
Sure.
that first. I had to really remember who I was as a writer. And I had confidence in that. So for myself and my editor, I pushed back a lot, actually. I received very, very valuable feedback from my editor, and sometimes I listened, but sometimes I really trusted my instinct and my gut, and I said, no, it's better the way I wrote it, and I'm going to just stick with that. And they were fine with that. To their credit, they listened to me, and we had a good rapport, but it was, I had to remember who I was and what I wanted to say.
Anyone else have thoughts on that or an experience?
Sure. Yeah, I would echo Karen. There were moments, particularly during the editing process, where I would receive an edit, get kind of upset, step away for a little while, and talk to myself and be like, no, you know, your editor doesn't know, everything they say isn't better than your original thought. You need to like process everything within you know, this realm where you're both equals and you both have the same goal of trying to make this book the best it can be. It's not a battle. It's a team effort, and then thinking about your own feelings and thinking why they said what they said, and trying to come out with the best outcome that you're happy with, and trusting that they're doing this for you and for no other reason. So standing up for yourself, but recognizing that it's a team effort.
Thanks, Tyler.
Dean, I'm going to jump in with a question here, because I see a few questions sort of popping up about platform, and we had a couple of questions emailed to us in advance about platform. And there is a lot of, you know, when you're in the program, when you're out in the larger publishing world, whether you go through an MFA, and certainly an MFA isn't the only route to publishing your book, but whether you go through a program or whether you're out there talking to other people in the writing world, there is a lot of talk about platform. And so a couple of the questions that have popped up are about, it doesn't sound like everybody on our panel had a gigantic platform before you wrote your book, found your way to a publisher, found your way to an agent. And I just wonder if folks can reflect a little bit on that, on the scariness of the platform issue, how you felt about it, and where it sort of sits now that you're on the other side, or coming to the other side of that publishing piece.
Well, I had a lot of publishers say no because of my lack of platform. Like they named that as a reason to decline the book. So I know that it's real. But the publisher who said yes, as I mentioned, they said they really loved my book and they saw the value of it. And it was a yes based on the writing and the idea. So I guess what I want to encourage people to do is spend the time on your craft and write beautifully about whatever you're writing about. And I think you have as real a chance as anyone else at getting your good book published.
Others want to jump in?
Yeah,
on that?
I had a strange experience because I had a platform, but it was a platform in a very different genre, different area. I was the reality television producer. So I was actually asked and, queried as to, who was I to be writing this book about a prison riot and issues related to, criminal justice in Canada. And I was really, stopped in my tracks and kind of went, wow, maybe I'm not the person. Maybe I can't write this story because I don't have that background. I'm not an expert. But I took that in and got beat down for a little while, and then I just remembered that I was my first career was a social worker, so I did have something in the background there. And it was actually my editor that said to me, "Weren't you a social worker before?" I'm like, "Oh, right, yes, you're right, I was." So I was literally told to almost like let go of everything that I currently was and kind of start from fresh, that my platform and who I was actually going to work against me in writing this book. So that was an interesting challenge. And what I did, as I mentioned before, I just said, I'm going to start a Facebook group and just, it's a slow and steady build. And I know that when the book comes out, I'll be sending that out there to however many are on that group right now, and just, build from there. So.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in on that platform question?
Well, I didn't have a social media platform, but I think they weren't so concerned about platform in the sense, well, I have a degree, so there's some sort of, encouragement behind that. But I guess it was the unique story that they wanted that was the main strength for it. So I guess that was their marketability that they were only interested in. So as wide an audience as you can get to is where you're going to get the bigger publishers involved, because I remember sitting down, because when you go into the meeting to meet the publisher, there's editor there, the publisher's there, but they also brought in their marketing team as well. Well, two people, but they were like excited, they said, to work on this. So it really, if you can appeal to a broad audience, and that can be, you have to make the case for that, and then you'll get their engagement, I think.
Yeah, I can kind of build off that too. I was pretty resistant to the whole platform idea, kind of along with what Karen said. I was just, hoping that there were still publishers out there who just published stuff because it was good and they liked it and they wanted it to exist. and that's great and all, but I think with my project in particular, I would have probably attracted the attention of a larger publisher had I brought a platform with my book. Because one of the major questions for my book was, well, is this topic relevant to a large enough market for us to be interested? Been able to bring that market to them and be like, well, I have access to these people through my platform. Maybe I would have got to deal with a bigger publisher is that something I wanted? I can't say. I'm very happy where I was or where I am. But now, 6 months out or less than 6 months out from publishing, I'm coming around to the idea that platform is pretty important for sales. And I'm learning a lot about social media as I go. I'm awful with it. I've been getting guidance from people who are better. And it is important, as much as I begrudgingly say that. It helps, especially when you're trying to actually sell the book once it comes out, to just be able to throw your book out there, because I never thought Instagram would ever sell copies of my book. It's a history book from 260 years ago, but when I post on Instagram, I get tons of interaction with people, and it sells books, and that's surprising me. So I'm learning and trying to be more open. And I'm sorry about my camera. I don't know what's going on.
And we'll quote you the next time we do a lecture on platform. I'm gonna clip that little section there, Tyler. Dean, I'll hand the questioning back over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Actually, a platform question from Gwen. She's done some research and looked into some book marketing. And one of the things that she mentions is that, your choice of a platform, especially in the social media world, may depend on your demographic. For instance, she believes, or she's heard, that newsletters, which some authors use, are great for people over 40. But younger audiences are likely to go to Twitter and Instagram. Any of you had any specific, have you ever had a sense that, your target audience is perhaps one place, not another?
I have the feeling that my target audience is very broad, but I don't do social media either, to Christian's point. So I have contacted David Choten, wealthy barber fame, and he told me to do a podcast. So I think platform is very important. And I'm finding that now that I'm not traveling and teaching, because that was my kind of platform, and that's not available now.
I asked my agent about this email newsletter idea because, well, basically I told her I was going to do one because I've heard and understood that it was important and effective. And she's temporarily stalled me on it, basically by questioning it and saying, everybody has an email newsletter, nobody reads them. And Instagram is where people go to find out what authors are doing and how they're living their lives and what they're interested in. So that's not to contradict Christian's research, because I really believe Christian on just about everything here. But so I wonder, and maybe to Gwen's point, that may be something to do with it. So
if
I think a newsletter would be fun to write. So part of me thinks if it would be fun for the author and enjoyable and a natural fit, then maybe it's something that would be worth doing, because if you hate doing it, it's not going to last. And I think that is true about all these things.
If I was to add to what you said, Karen, as far as social media goes, I think it's going to be more important after the book is out. I'm not expecting it to bring people to buy the book. I want to bring people to me after they buy the book and read it, because I think that's where you're going to have the conversation. And if they can get access to you, that's where the social media power comes into play, because if they see that you're responding to them, then they might be more likely to recommend your book, say, oh, I had a great discussion about this from the author, and this is what I learned, and maybe, take a read, kind of thing. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be driving people to go buy it. I'm hoping that it will be driving people to talk about it with you and with others.
That makes sense.
If I could just pick up on that, one thing that I don't know if a lot of authors realize it is part of platform building is Goodreads and reviews on Amazon and Chapters Indigo. I mean, I think those are very influential for readers. and they're places readers go. So, you know, you can have an author page, and I'm as guilty as anyone of not maybe keeping it up to date. But, you know, the Amazon and Chapters give you these tools to use. And I think Goodreads is very useful. And one thing, and it struck me when Christian said about people following up, you will get people who've read your book, hopefully liked your book, who will contact you. And I often, you know, you're grateful for the feedback. Sometimes they have specific questions, but I always say, you know, if you have a few moments, if you would post a review, you know, they've said nice things to you about the book, post it on Goodreads or Amazon if you do that kind of thing. And not everyone does, but it helps build that platform. And you know, it's not like it's not like I'm out soliciting relatives to do it or something. I mean, these are real readers who just haven't thought, oh, hey, there's something I could do. So just another thing to throw in on platform building. I had another. Oh, sorry, Kim. Did you want to take over
No,
the
no,
question?
I was just going to say quickly to follow up on Karen's point too, that there are lots of ways to build a platform, and there are and there are lots of voices that they're saying, oh, this is the best way, that's the best way, you should do Instagram, you should do newsletters, you should do newsletters, not Instagram, you should be standing on the corner selling them out of the back of your car. I once had a guy come to my door selling his book door to door. I didn't buy it. But but I do think that there is that piece of it about, what do you really enjoy doing? The guy who came to my door selling that book door to door, I think he more than anything just liked talking to people, and so that was working for him. That wouldn't work for others. So I think that there's that piece too, that if you're going to have to, if you're spending your time doing something, it should be something that what you bring to it will help sell the book as well. And if you hate grinding it out on Twitter, you're unlikely to be successful building a platform on Twitter.
I got to say, Kim, that door-to-door strategy is a disaster in the time of COVID. But
it is not so good.
I just wanted a questions come in. It's a bit out of order, but it's on point from Caroline. Just pointing out that don't forget Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We don't own those. Those are anyway. You don't necessarily control those platforms forever if rules change or things like that. Whereas a newsletter and a website are your own. So, Karen, maybe that goes to some of the what you mentioned. Megan's been very patient. She had a question about Memoir, and there's a couple of people here, I think, who could maybe address this. Where do you draw the line when you're doing a memoir that's based on family experience? When do you determine if your personal experience is something that a wider audience needs to hear? In other words, how do you respect privacy, either of yourself or people close to you who are in the book? I suppose Karen and Christian are the more logical people on this. One of you would jump in?
I think there's two ways I'm hearing that question. One being, how do I know what this particular thing I'm writing about applies to other people? So I'm going to say there that as I neared publication, I was not adding things. I was stripping out all the time as I rewrote my book. And it was about that very question often. Like I wrote a chapter on parenting, and I remember reading it with clearer eyes, closer to publication, going, I have too many cute stories in this about my own kids that don't add to the, no one cares that my son was a spelling bee champion in Durham. It's not adding to the big story I'm telling here. And so it's darling to me, but I got to get rid of it. So there was a ruthlessness that I had to step into, which I was fine with, to strip out exactly what didn't contribute to what Megan is referring to. So I think your gut will tell you, your experience will tell you, your editor will tell you. And it's a bigger mistake for me to leave things in than take them out. To the question of sensitivity, I showed most of what I wrote to the person prior to publishing. I didn't ask permission. I just told them what I was doing. And I think the implication was, if you have a problem with it, you can let me know. But even then, I didn't actually say that. But I felt like I would sleep better at night if they had seen the work prior, for the most part.
Christian, did you have something similar
Oh,
experience?
I did, in fact. And it was just brought up to me recently because through a Facebook chat, I guess one friend of the family said, oh, I hear your Aunt Janice isn't too pleased about something in the book. And I'm going, she hasn't even read it. Nobody's read anything. So how do they know? Right. So I said, well, I think they're, worried because they don't know what it's actually there. But there were some really important events that happened early in my mother's childhood that affects the family and I guess the descendants of the people that were around them. I'm being very cryptic because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but so it's just, I didn't contact these people because it's fact. Like, this is part of the family history. I've got more than one person saying it. I didn't feel like I needed to keep family secrets hidden because it's part of what's known. And so I have it on tape from multiple people. So for me, I just took a very step back and said, deal with it, kind of thing. Not very sensitive, I know, but if it's part of the fact, then that's I felt more comfortable putting in. Now there's some things, like I changed someone's name because she was a very timid person. In fact, it was the person that I talked to you about giving me the email. I kept her first name, but I never disclosed her last name. But everyone else's names are not shielded because it's all part of what I call the record. So I just sort of, bear it all and just hope it falls out well.
And one strategy, I know a lot of writers who grapple with this in memoir, one piece of advice I've seen is write it all, don't censor at the time you're writing, because that can really get in the way of telling the story. And more of a Karen, of your approach, Karen, is to go back and start rethinking, editing, looking for where you've gone overboard or where material simply isn't needed.
Yeah.
So I'd throw that out.
Yeah.
I did have, I don't know how are we doing for time, Kim?
We've
I
got
did-
about 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
Got another question. It's from someone who just came in a little bit late and missed some of our talk about the specifics about how they got their publisher, and was saying that she didn't realize how that I guess everyone had been a graduate of the MFA program. So one question they're wondering is about how, maybe put it this way: how did the program work for you? Was it worth the investment? And was it good for bringing you in contact with your publisher? I know you might have talked about a bit about this, but it is someone who joined us late.
I I can speak to that one. The program, for me, there's multiple reasons why I thought the program was going to be helpful for me. One was to have a focus, to have deadlines, to have responsibilities. I've been writing for years and had never been able to actually get into any of these long-term projects that I have on my notes application on my computer, which is home to 400 books that have never been written. And the structure of the program was what I needed to do this project. Without the program, I don't think I would have this book right now. It also, like I said earlier, gave me access to the publisher that ended up becoming my publisher. And then, I mean, to speak to whether it's worth the investment, I mean, I'm a sucker for student debt because I just want to learn as much as possible and try to sort that out later. But I think it was absolutely worthwhile to me. If you want to write a book and want some help with it, it was worthwhile to me. I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, I'll pipe in too. I mean, it was instrumental because there's no doubt about it. I mean, I have a full-time job. If I didn't have that structure, I would never have sat down at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning to hash out whatever I needed to do for my monthly quota to the mentors, or even get the deal after the fact. So, I mean, I met my agent through the program, and if she hadn't bitten, she would have floated, I think she floated it to 5 publishers, and 4 out of 5 wanted to meet with me. So, I mean, I thought that would never have happened if it was a blind submission. I'm sure of it. So you have the option to meet people. Even if you don't get that connection, you're getting that feedback for when you do send it out on your own. You get that feedback, and you basically wipe out all the bad stuff that I went through in my first few pitches, just so you have that refined gem to send out into the world. So, and also a copy editor. Make sure if you're not going through the program, I work with a copy editor on top of my editor, and she was amazing. So if you don't do anything, spend your money on a copy editor, because they will refine the language to make it so crisp and wonderful. At least she did in my case. And so I think that's important. And secondly, after the program, I got into a writers group from the People. We met every month, and we still do. So your community continues to go on if you choose to do that. So, in the program, I met the 4 or 5 of us that meet monthly still.
And this questioner also had some specific questions about the structure of the program and costs and things. And I just encourage them to contact Kim or contact us through the program, and we can fill you in on some of those details. I don't have any other questions in the queue, Kim.
There we go. Desperately trying to find the unmute button. That's great. Thanks so much for handling the Q&A for us, Dean, and thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your insights, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing the stories of your stories. We will be sending out some tip sheets to all of the participants, all of the attendees here. So we've got some tip sheets that we distribute to our students about finding agents, about finding publishers, and I'm happy to share those with the folks who have sat with us for the last 90 minutes or so of the session. So we'll send those along with some links to the MFA program. And as Dean said, if you're interested in finding out more about the MFA, we're happy to talk to you about it. Certainly an MFA is not the only way to publish your book. As I say this to people all of the time, there are many routes to publishing a book, and lots of people who publish a book without an MFA. So I don't like to do too hard a sell on that front, but I will say, as folks around this table have said, that the MFA does provide a certain kind of structure to the process that does help through all of that. Thanks to all of our panelists. I will also flag that Dean Job is teaching a 4-week nonfiction course through the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia, and we'll include some information about that in the email that we send out to you. So before I wrap things up completely, I am going to share the screen again so that you can see the book covers for all of our terrific authors today. And someone in the Q&A said, are you going to tell us how to buy these books? And yes, of course, we're going to tell you how to buy these books. You can order your copies from your usual online suspects, your favorite independent bookstore. And if you feel so inclined, we're also happy to have you support the University of King's College, the King's Co-op bookstore, which you can find at kingsbookstore.ca. And they're happy to, Paul, the manager of the bookstore, is more than happy to send out copies by mail. And if you're in the Halifax area, he might even deliver them by bicycle as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a terrific evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.